One interesting element of the Confederation that moves ahead into the presidency is, where do we look for our inspiration now that we've become a free people? Where do we get our information from? Washington would have been a huge advocate of the internet. He really believed in information, and he believed in gathering, in particular, classifying and disseminating information and knowledge. He believed it was a global thing. He believed that people needed to work together globally to learn and to produce. So what that means, if somebody is innovating, as right now Great Britain, even though we've defeated them, Great Britain is the world's greatest epicenter of innovation. They've gone through an agricultural revolution. They've started an industrial revolution. George Washington is completely aware of this. That's where the knowledge is. That's where the people are doing the really cool things that we need to do over here in America, because American farmers drive George Washington crazy. They're so backward. They're so wasteful. They're so stuck in their ways. He thinks they're almost medieval in their attitudes. We need to get them to learn how to do these things the British are doing. So he develops this friendship with many great British, in particular Scottish innovators. I wish I had more time to talk about them. One of them in particular, a fellow named Arthur Young. Arthur Young was an English thinker, entrepreneur, who was a great classifier of information. What he would do is he would travel all over Western Europe and other different parts of the world, and he would study how people are producing, primarily in agriculture, but also in other things. He would send them queries about, how are you producing what you're producing? What are you getting for it? How do you trade? Where are you, are you successful? Are you not successful? He would gather that up, he would classify it and organize it, then he published it in a magazine, a periodical called Annals of Agriculture, which was it was in some ways the Wikipedia of its day. And it became extremely popular. George Washington bought it himself. And Washington and Young began to correspond publicly. Their correspondence was published to share their knowledge of how Americans did things and how the Brits did things, and people in other parts of the world as well. Now, Washington as president, and I will get through this so that we have time for questions. Washington as president, to think of this, I was absolutely amazed. Right before he enters into his office, he writes a letter saying very succinctly what he wants to do, what's his job as president going to be. He says, "To build the national prosperity shall be my first and my only aim." Imagine that. Imagine a president coming into office saying, "That's it. That's what I'm here for. That's what I'm going to do." There are many different facets of that, but that's absolutely his focus. Now, there are a number of different elements of that. The primary thing, of course, is to build a stable and productive economy. That means, among different things, establishing the national credit through paying off regularly a revolving debt and paying down the foreign debt, which he focuses on. He's able to pay off the entire debt to France, which is huge. It's crippling. When he enters office, the national debt is absolutely crippling. He's able to reduce it profoundly, but also to maintain and to continue to pay it. That's how you prove to people you can continue to pay. To establish a stable currency, very much fundamental. To establish a stable and secure government through taxation that's adequate to pay the government's needs, but is not crippling. Also, of course, a national bank. Now, he sees what the Bank of England has done for Great Britain. what a huge effect it's had on allowing the British to develop and allowing the British government to develop and to thrive economically. He wants something like that here. But ultimately, he believes that the government's role is to establish a clear and level playing field. He believes that fundamentally the people produce their own wealth. The government's job is, among other things, to develop and maintain infrastructure, to ensure that nobody is able to prey rapaciously on their neighbors, but more than anything else, to keep the peace. And I'll get back to that in my last comment. I want to say something about Alexander Hamilton. Alexander Hamilton was a great partner for George Washington. We were talking before I came up here about Hamilton. Of course, you know a little bit about him now, especially recently. He's become a bigger name recently. The suggestion is often made that George Washington kind of turned everything over to Alexander Hamilton that had to do with the economy and said, Alex, I can't figure this stuff out. What do all these numbers mean? You do it. That's not really true. Now, first of all, Hamilton was not his first choice as Secretary of the Treasury. Actually, his first choice was financier Robert Morris, who declined. Once he got Hamilton, though, he was happy to keep him. But George Washington set the strategy among those things that I've laid out to you here. He set the strategy for what we want to do, and he asked Alexander Hamilton to implement it. And he studied everything that Hamilton suggested, and he didn't agree with everything. He had James Madison draw up a veto of the National Bank, the Bank of the United States. And it came down literally to the last second. George was about to veto that because he was very concerned about whether it was constitutional or not. Ultimately, he did not, but he came very close. The last comment I will make is about peace. Establishing and maintaining the national peace. George Washington is a combat veteran. War is above all devastating to a society, to an economy. Any type of major war. He believes we must keep the peace, and it's not easy. There's so many people like Thomas Jefferson who, when the French get involved in a war with Great Britain, they rush off and they say, the French are our friends, they helped rescue us during the Revolution, we got to go to war with Great Britain. Washington says, wait, we got another war, we face utter and complete ruin. We barely made it through the Revolutionary War. The economy was a mess. Washington believes you keep the domestic and the international peace in order to sustain commerce. Commerce is what binds people together. Internal and external commerce is what binds people together. And so I believe that Washington was ultimately not just a great entrepreneur, but because he was a great entrepreneur, he was also a very successful president. And if you look at what he wanted to accomplish, to promote the national prosperity as my first and my only aim, and by that to keep the peace, to build the foundations of our future prosperity, I do think he was our greatest American. Thank you very much.